And we are live on LinkedIn, live on Facebook, live on YouTube. And here he is, Brian Kelly. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, my friend. Good to be with you, Gary.
Oh, likewise. Well, thank you very much for bearing with my technical faux pas. For those that have been on this journey with me the last few months, I've had many. So yeah, how are you doing today? What's it like in your neck of the world, Brian?
It's not too bad. A little humid today. It looks like we're going to get a little bit of rain, but other than that, it's all good.
Amazing to hear. Well, look, as you know, this show that we're going to have about a half an hour exploration. If you're joining us on any of those platforms, thank you. If you join us in the future, thank you. I really, really love spending time with Brian. So I just want to start right here, right now in this moment. What's on your heart and mind, Brian?
So it's interesting. Recently, I was in a conversation and we were talking about humility. And it got me thinking about humility with regard to leadership and just even how we be. Mm-hmm. And I had a new insight that humility is one of the under talked about, appreciated traits of leadership because it invites all the ones we do talk about, like empathy, compassion, vulnerability, which is something that's near and dear to our stories, right? And so I got curious about humility. And that's a trait I admire in leaders. What if we were more humble individually and collectively? What would that invite us to step into? And it was a really interesting conversation. And I hadn't thought about humility in that regard before or with that much depth, but I've been thinking about it the last week. So it's been on my mind. Humility as a sort of a catalyst and an invitation for us to step into greater acceptance of one another and all the things we're looking for at a societal level, at an organizational level, at a community level, at a family level, and then even with ourselves.
Cool. Got my juices flowing. Love it. Humility. Right. So I'm now wondering, as you said, vulnerability is a thing that you and I both talk about. We've both had our own, we explain very publicly our journeys with vulnerability, the challenges with that. Where do you see the interplay, intersection, jostling position between vulnerability and humility? I'm just wondering what comes up for you around that.
I'm so glad you asked that, Gary. I sort of anticipated that we might get into that. I just go through my own story with vulnerability, and I couldn't get there without going through humility first, and the humbleness of the experience I went through, right? And making it about something bigger than myself, because it's very difficult to get vulnerable, as you and I know, but if you haven't gone through the inner work it takes to go through inner change and personal development, it's difficult to understand. But once you've gone through it, right, it takes humility to say, you know what, I don't have to be perfect. You know what, I can be myself. You know what, yeah, I messed up. My relationship with failure, my relationship with control, all the things that we as people and as leaders struggle with. Humility is sort of I won't say a prerequisite, but it's got to be a present factor to get to vulnerability, acceptance, empathy, compassion, right? And I started thinking more about this because humility is one of my top values, right? It's always been one of my top values, but I hadn't made that connection until recently. I'm like, maybe there's something there that I need to do a video on, or maybe a book or something on, because I don't, it's not just something that I came up with and it's like, oh, Brian came up with this brilliant idea, let me go boast about it now, kind of thing. It's something I believe, right? I believe because of my experience that humility is a key factor in us being caring leaders. We're both caring leadership coaches, and being human-centered leaders and showing up with vulnerability, right? Empathy, compassion, acceptance, curiosity, right? I think all of those stem from the presence of humility.
Well, the whole of my body's just going like, oh my God, like I'm connecting massively to what you're sharing. And I tell you why, I'm grinning, because as the words came out of your mouth, I was thinking, Jesus, there's definitely something in this, right, Brian? Because when we think about things like being courageous or being vulnerable or, being curious, right? It's really interesting because like we say about being those, but in a way they're sort of doing, they're verb, like they're an action that you're taking to step into being more vulnerable or to being curious. So it's a really weird sort of like, what are words at the end of the day? They just help us form what's flying around in the cosmos and comes out as like, okay, this is what it means to me, right? So we don't talk about humility, being humble. I know there's a book called Humble Leadership, I think, which I've not read yet. But I love this idea that if we started with humility, how does that open? How do you then sense into whether you need to be vulnerable in a situation, or you actually being curious might be helpful? If you're not coming from that place of humility, i.e., not needing to have all the answers, how can you know which next step to take? I think that's you've really got me thinking, Brian. You've really got me thinking.
It's interesting, right? It's all how we think about it, just like anything else, like with vulnerability, right? It's not vulnerability, it's our relationship with it that becomes difficult, right? And I said that recently on a podcast. And so with humility, right, it doesn't mean weakness. We think of humble as weak, and all, like, kindness. Don't mistake my kindness for weakness. It's almost like the same thing with humility. Don't mistake my humility for weakness, right? Or meekness. Humility is inner strength combined with, and I think there's a quote around this, thinking more about others than yourself. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking more about others. So it's that combination, it's that duality of inner strength and that curiosity and that energy about thinking beyond self. And so it's just like vulnerability in my mind. It's that strength, right? It takes strength to be humble, and think about it, right? If there's ego, is there humility? And so humbleness is, I know who I am. I have that inner self confidence, that integrity with self, and yet, you know what? I know that there's more for me to learn. I know there's a broader perspective that will help me be a better leader. I know that in order for me to connect with people, I need to see differently. I need to be differently. And as you were talking about courage, any value you can think of, and this came up in another forum that I was in, values are verbs, right? So courage is a verb. Mm-hmm. Humility is a verb, right? Vulnerability, it's those values in terms of anything that integrity is a verb. It's demonstrated integrity is what we're saying. It's not the word integrity, it's demonstrated integrity. And so this whole notion of values are verbs. And so what if we led with humility? What does that invite us into? And this whole invitation, everything's an invitation. This whole illusion of control, I think, gets us in trouble, right? We all think we can control things, and we need to control things, and we've been conditioned to control things. And so and that's the whole thing with humility. Think about what it takes to surrender. Think what it takes to let go, to release. Mm-hmm. It takes a bit of humility. It's like, I don't need to control. I don't need to, and then it's the other flip side of that is faith and trust. I trust that the universe, will look out for me. I trust that, there's a plan for me, something bigger than self. And so that humility gets back to the relationship of greater than self, right? And so what if we started with humility as individuals, and then collectively, what would be different became the musing that I've been thinking about for the last week or so.
I love you brought this up. This is definitely a new one on this live show, Brian. So I just want to share with everyone, because like I say, I don't think about that word a lot, humility. So I've just gone on the internet, excuse for the clicking. So I just wanted to share with the listeners, in case you haven't, or the watchers, if you haven't thought about this recently. So humility, the quality of having a modest or low view of one's importance. And I love how you made a distinguish, this is so important. There's a distinguishing factor between seeing myself as less important versus seeing yourself with low self-worth. They're two very, very different things. Mm-hmm. That's what's coming up for me as I reflect on that meaning.
I love that, because I believe the embodiment of humility is the less than, when the definition is less important, meaning it's not that I don't focus on myself, but I focus my attention more on others. And it's that whole me-we dynamic. We includes me, right? If we think about we includes me, it's the same sort of notion, but I think it's the way we choose to look at it. I think there's been a conditioning maybe with humility, right? Because if you're thinking about the command and control or industrial age strength, be a man, kind of like all that machoism, humbleness doesn't fit with that characterization, that embodiment, that conditioning. And so again, back to, and I hate this term, the soft skills, right? But back to the point I made before is, if you've ever gone through the inner work it takes to make change, create real meaningful change, you know that it's not soft at all. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's a continuing journey, and that's part of being human, right? And so it gets me into other topics then too, as we think about human, like masculine and feminine energy. Mm-hmm. Those are labels, right? right? So we define certain terms, assertiveness and as masculine, but when a woman shows up as assertive, oh, that gets a different reaction, right? So that's another thing to get curious about, right? It's not, those are labels we've put on them in terms of qualities we typically see in men and women, but they're really human. And we value industrial age, again, mindset, the type of leadership that has been accepted until now is more defined with masculine, right? And so now we're talking about, well, we need more feminine energy in leadership. It's always been there. We just haven't valued it. So what if we just valued it differently and change the terminology from masculine and feminine to human? It's one of the human qualities. There may be tendencies that biologically or otherwise they show up more frequently in women and men. We've all got them. And so this notion of, oh, if I'm a man, I have to avoid being associated with feminine energy or feminine qualities. Okay. How's that working for you? How's that going to work for you with building relationships, right? In some form or fashion, it's going to manifest. And the same thing with women. If women aren't able to be assertive in some of these other qualities that help make for a great leader. Again, leader is human. There's no male leader, female leader. It's just human leader. And so I think the way we look at things in language is important. And that's another topic I've been on, is this masculine and feminine energy, which again is back to humility and thinking beyond self. It's thinking of the broader human lens, through the broader human lens. And what if we thought about energy as energy and not about a gender attachment to it, right? It just brings up different possibilities.
It's amazing. You might have had an ice cream van go past just then. I did really quickly.
Grab me something, Gary. Let's go.
Absolutely old school pandemic life. Go get yourself a 99 right now. I think what I'm really, really loving about this, what's been interesting for me, Brian, as I listen to you, you interchange quite a lot the words humility and humble, right? Very easily. And I'm like, that's really interesting. Like, how similar or different are they? And the meaning of humble is having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's importance. Humility, the quality of having a modest or low view of one's importance. So two words meaning exactly the same thing, which is why words are so important. Yep, we need to know what consciously, intentionally, what words we're using, because people react differently. Like, one person might hear humility completely different to how they hear humble. Like, I was really piercing through my mind as you were talking, going like, humble, humility, going, are they different? Are they the same? And I think that's why we really do need to slow down and be present with one another as human beings to really understand what each other are saying. Because let me give you a real life example of this. Quite recently, I assumed, Brian, with one of my friends, very innocently, they said to me, they identified they said to me, attachment. I think attachment's a really nice thing. Like, it comes from a place of love. You feel attached to another person, etc. And I was like, yeah, but attachment is really challenging. It's very difficult to let go of things if you get too attached. And that person then said to me, or I realized on reflection, very innocently, because I didn't clarify what they meant by attachment, and I used my assumption of what attachment meant, I really risked upsetting that person, because they went off going, okay, well, that person, Gary doesn't hear me. Gary doesn't listen to me, because he didn't ask and clarify what attachment meant to me. And that's why I really wanted to pick up on this difference between humility and humbleness. Although they're very similar, if we don't clarify what the words mean to another human, we can go down all sorts of rabbit holes. And I'm wondering if you would challenge or build or add any extra context on that. And thanks for joining us, Karima, as well. Great to see Karima.
Hi, Karima. Great to see you. So humility, right? Humility is a noun, right? So what's the adjective for humility? I mean, isn't it humble?
Great point. Really,
and so,
really
and then point. I thought about this too, because I was challenged. I was like, Brian, challenge yourself. What could come up? What about humbleness, right? And so, okay, humbleness, but who uses humbleness? It's humility that is the term that people use, right? That I hear most often. And so, however we want, being humble, humility, for me, and let's take it to real, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, right? Mm-hmm. How can we get to belonging without humility? How can, and so if we want to talk about, conditions that are present to create greater inclusion, how do we get there without humility? And then how do we get there without acceptance, vulnerability, empathy, compassion? And so I talk about creating the conditions a lot. All those conditions are human conditions, right?
Yeah.
All ones that many of us have been conditioned to not value, shy away from showing up as, particularly as men, right? Because they're more feminine qualities. And yet, when we look at what leadership going forward, we hope it looks more like is with more of the feminine qualities, right? Caring, love, empathy, compassion. And guess what? We all have access to them, right? But some of us have been conditioned to or chosen to shut off access to them. So guess what, everybody? We can open up that access. It's a choice, right? And it's a building the muscle kind of thing, which is what I typically work with people on, is opening up access to where they are, what are their goals. And oftentimes it's, yeah, I want to do this in terms of a goal, but really it comes down to shifting who they are and how they look at things in terms of vulnerability or humility or things like that, which are human traits. And if we look at them as human, then I feel less, oh man, I'm less of a man if I show up as more compassionate or talk about love in the workplace, or I'm the type of woman that people won't view as a leader if I'm too assertive. It's like, no, that's not the way we look at things. We look at it as human. And what if we did? What if we saw people as people, human as human, and we valued the traits that made great leaders and didn't put gender attachments to them?
Mate, this is so important, right? Because again, we're not discounting any of those challenges that come from any of the diversity and inclusion. We understand why there are different groupings and ERG groups and support networks in place. What we're saying is, if we get to the root cause of so much pain in the workplace and in society at large, it's because we see certain people as less than human. That's the summary issue. Whereas if we can see each other as whole human beings first, humans first, then we just completely transform the world. Like we transform the world overnight. And this is coming from two slightly less haired white guys, two different parts of the world, talking about love, connection, and humility. Like we can do this. Like we don't have to hold on to that pain in our heads of I wasn't taught this, or I was told I wasn't good enough, or I was bullied as a kid, as you know I was. Like we can hold on to those bloody stories, but we can let them go, Brian. If the pandemic has shown us one thing, we do not need to hold on to the beliefs that hold us back anymore.
And that's the thing you were talking about with attachment. It's the perspective we hold, right? And so when we start thinking in terms of how we think as the truth and more of the perspective I hold, wow. And so that's something for me. That's why with Humans First, whenever I'm in a community or in a conversation, I listen and I get curious, because my curiosity is how can I expand my perspective and see differently, right? I've never been through life as Karima's on here, as an African-American woman or an Asian man or a Latino woman or someone that's LGBT, like someone that's different than me. So rather than showing up in a way that doesn't include people that are different from me, how about if I got curious and understand the perspective more, what might that invite me into, invite us into? And so, it takes some level of humility, vulnerability, compassion, empathy to get there. And I believe humility is at the core of one of those conditions that need to be present to get there as well. And so you look at all the things that are going on in society, right? The, Black Lives Matter, Asian hate, and mental health. And this is something else I might, invite a brief conversation on too, because it's personally relevant for me now in terms of I have been struggling with anxiety in a way that I haven't made public until I'm speaking about it now. And I've always had, compassion, at least in my mind and in my heart, for people going through that. But it's very real. It's very prevalent. And we talk about the pandemic of COVID, the one that's on the horizon, if it's not already here, is mental health. And so how do we get to a workplace that treats mental health the same they do as physical health and well-being and overall human well-being? And it takes these humans first qualities, right, that we talk about: vulnerability, humility, caring, and looking at people as people, and our employees as people, our coworkers as people, and leading from that place. And so what happens when we invite that caring leadership and we think about things in those terms, and we ask people how they're doing, and people don't feel like they need to suppress that they have a condition that is a medical condition that is not allowing them to be themselves, that if they got treatment, they could be back to themselves and not be shamed for it.
So I'm glad you brought up the mental health part. I had my mini burnout, sort of for 4 years ago. And what we don't realize, and again, I'm not belittling any mental health challenges at all, this humility bit's so important. But what I realized is that my burnout wasn't caused by the outside world. It is my thinking and my stories around me as I went through it. So let me bring that to life. And again, I'm not belittling anybody. Everyone's got their own experience. But on being bullied in the workplace previously, I told myself, are you being bullied again? Like when he was 13, 14, you're in the wrong place. You're not good enough. Your face doesn't fit. So although there was really terrible behavior, Brian, on the outside of me in the environment within which I worked, that didn't cause me to burn out. What's going on inside my head is what caused me to burn out as I layered up and got more and more frustrated, more and more angry, more and more anxious. And that inside out understanding for some people, not everybody, but in my case, that was a huge revelation when I sat on day 2 of retreat and just went, oh my God, it wasn't that boss that caused me to feel awful. I actually did it to myself. And it's going to sound mad, but there was so much freedom when I realized that I didn't need to tell those stories to myself anymore. And then everything literally in the moment, Brian, just lifted. It was like a spiritual awakening. It's mad. Absolutely incredible.
I can appreciate that, because you speak about that, and it's a similar feeling to when I reframed my relationship with vulnerability. What I felt was freedom. It's like this big exhale happened, right? And I could just be me and be okay with what that was, right? And so you talk about how you got to burnout and anxiety. And the thing is, it doesn't matter from how we show up for other people that have mental health challenges, how they got there. We just need to love them and appreciate that they're going through a struggle right now. And it's a human struggle. And to not shame them for having the difficulties. Like I saw Vivian popped in about Naomi Osaka. And it's like, such a thing, right? The whole thing about the system of when you're a professional tennis player, part of your job is to do interviews afterwards. Okay. But the type of questions they have to endure every time after going through a difficult time, they don't get any time to decompress. They have to go right to a press conference and answer, how come you were terrible today type of questions, or, how come, could you have done better? And think about that. Anytime you've been through a difficult situation, I know for me, I just need time to process. I can remember even as a youth in a soccer game, we might have lost, and my parents are coming up to me and saying, good game. I don't even want to hear praise at that point. I just let me be, and then give me a couple of minutes, and then let me do that. And so I think that the notion of how we get there is something for us to understand about the person and their story, and that helps us bring us together in terms of understanding them. But I think that whole respect for mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever flavor of it you may be experiencing, it's just honoring that that's a health condition that we need to respect in the workplace, just in society, in a way that differently than we have, so that we can be more human leaders, we can be more, human beings for each other, and show up with caring for all people, right? And so I think that is a topic I brought up because of the personal relevance, but I think it's applicable in some way to all of us because we've either dealt with it or know someone who has.
Yeah, it's never far away from any one of us, is it, Brian? And I think one of the things I want to acknowledge, thanks very much, Amarachi, for coming. Thanks, Vivian, as well, for commenting. You're really adding to this discussion. The thing that's really coming up as well, right? I always try and play a bit of devil's advocate, Brian, right? And we're sitting here like we both really believe in the importance of humanity, both from a humanitarian, but also performance point of view, right? I think sometimes these things are too separate. Like be more human, be more vulnerable, be more caring. Oh, make money, hit metrics, hit targets. Like it's all part of the same thing. And what I want more people to realize, because I'm doing it in my own workplace, when we role model this stuff, when we lead with vulnerability, hear people's voice, see the whole person, as our mutual friend Heather Younger. We're both caring leadership coaches. The Art of Caring Leadership by Heather Younger. She's got the evidence in her book, over 80 speakers. You've got the evidence working with as a professional, as an executive coach. I'm a practitioner. I added 6 million in sales and 2 million in margin over 3 years by doing this stuff. It makes more money. We design in line with nature's systems, and we get out of each other's way by doing this stuff. So I just really want to bring this home, that this is not a soft, fluffy thing to be doing. We make more money, and it's healthier for everyone. So why aren't we doing it, Brian? Why are we not just jumping on this? I just don't get it.
And so I think it's resistance to change, and again, comfort zone, growth zone, and in terms of what people have been comfortable with, right? And so systems, right? We have systems, right? And so sometimes we just get complacent in the system. This is the way things are, or we're comfortable in our status in the systems, right? Which is for some parts of the population that are, maybe in leadership, maybe our demographic, and there's this not wanting to relinquish, again, humility and control, and broadening the scope of what leadership can be, so we can all benefit. But some people may feel like this potential to lose something. And so I think when there's scarcity mindset, we all lose, right? And so when there's abundance mindset, the invitation is there for everybody that wants to show up with and for other people. And so I think that's the invitation. And so you talk about the success you've had and how, Art of Caring Leadership, and we see great examples, Gary Ridge, WD-40, and, Claude Silver and Gary Vaynerchuk. There's examples of, and for me, the thing that I noticed that is different, one of the things, because I'm sure there are many, is the short-term focus that we have historically had on what performance looks like, 90-day cycles. Right. And so when 90-day cycle, so every decision then is focused on the 90-day cycle and the performance and the shareholder value. We're slowly moving to beyond that and getting to this longer term perspective. What happens when you have a longer term perspective? What is your relationship to failure? You're willing to invest in professional leadership development. Your willingness to tolerate failure and create greater innovation and creativity. Your willingness to invest in creating an environment that is conducive to talking about and demonstrating and caring for your people in the workplace. It takes an investment, and the investment takes a while to manifest and materialize so that you have the long-term value. How many people have the patience to wait for that? Because the ROI doesn't say, let's continue doing this and let's shut it off after 6 months because we don't see the return. Instead of if we waited 2 or 3 years, we'd see 200 times, results, whatever it might be. And I'm using it as an example, but I think the short-sightedness that we've approached business and relationship to performance becomes the lens through which we've been looking at it. If we start thinking in terms of a longer term perspective, think about your purpose and your mission. We talk about purpose and mission. If you're truly committed to it, what is time horizon?
Nice.
Right? What is time horizon? Because it's time horizon is just milestone points that you assess and you say, do I need to pivot? Do I continue? What do I keep? What do I let go? And the mission might continue to evolve, but you don't change. You change the sales, but you're still going in the same direction, right? Instead of, oh my God, we just missed the quarter by 25 cents on the shareholder value thing, and now we've got we start up all these projects that are short-term and transactional and reactive, instead of knowing. It's sort of the same thing as a human being. Back to humility. When you know who you are, you can step into more fully vulnerability, humility, acceptance, curiosity. And so I think there's a dynamic at play there with the human being, the leader, and then also the organization. If we take some of these same human caring leadership qualities and apply them to what if we looked at things like, as a human being, it's a lifetime journey to discover yourself, right? Keep learning about yourself, to learning about how to be more courageous, vulnerable, human, whatever it might be, stronger as a human being. And that doesn't mean physically stronger, but it can be. And so the long game becomes the opportunity. And I hear others talking about it as well. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about it all the time. And so the value, and I love what Kareem was talking about there, it's the long game. And so if you're playing the long game, how discerning are you then about who you recruit and bring into your organization? Or is it just, oh, I just lost a project manager, I've got to bring in a project manager. Or I just lost a director of finance, I've got to bring a director of finance, instead of, wait a minute, this is an opportunity for us to reassess. What do we need? Oh, you know what? We really need to have a VP of finance and build another element of the finance organization so we can restructure that. How do we make that happen so that our longer term vision is better served, instead of, oh, I lost this. It's like lose and replace. And that's what I've seen a lot of, is that kind of a hiring practice. And then when we do that, is let's look at our organization. Are we as diverse, as we, as inclusive, and are we modeling the equity we preach, right, in terms of wanting our organization to be like that? And so I think the long-term perspective gives us a greater opportunity for that.
Beautiful. Are we modeling the equity that we preach? Wow. Boop. Mic drop from Mr. Brian Kelly. I think it's a brilliant challenge. I think it's a great, in a performative culture that we're in, the Instagram generation, like let's send out a message of what we're doing. Like, are you really doing it? And I've been challenging myself, Brian, with this in the last 72 hours a lot. I'm a big thinker. I'm very strategic. I also implement. But talk is cheap, yeah? Like, you and I have benefited from a system, not directly, but we're sitting here with access to a computer. We can do this live conversation. Not everybody can do that. And then I look through to this, then back to that systemic piece around finance. Now, for anybody that hasn't seen it yet, there's a podcast that I've got called Activating Consciousness. And actually this week's episode 14, is with an amazing human called Natasha Stromberg, who's based in Canada. Actually, she's actually a Brit, Brian, but now based in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And she's asserting the well-being economy away from the financial and capitalist economy to well-being. And what she says very simply, it's an economy based on doing stuff and not consuming or buying stuff. So community-based, sharing stuff that's no longer of use anymore, regenerative agriculture on a local basis. Like, yes, it's almost going back to basics, but don't the basics fill us? Like, the basics are spending time with you now and our people that have joined us today. This is enriching. This is life affirming. This is energizing. Like, I don't need to buy a 50 grand car to make me feel better. Like, this is what makes me feel better. What about you?
I totally agree. And the whole thing about, if I've got something that I don't need, sharing and giving that to others, and that whole the humanity, the we aspect of things too, right? Instead of how many of us just throw stuff away, and I'm guilty of that too. I don't mean to preach and get on that soapbox, but in terms of the opportunity that Natasha brought up with what she was sharing there, I think there's an opportunity for us to be differently. And she talked about well-being and doing and community, and that's taking action, and that's a conscious choice, right? It's consciousness, it's conscious humanism, I guess, if you want to call it something along those lines. And so there's always a greater opportunity for that. But the conversations that you invite, and I'm so grateful for our conversation today, you talk about activating consciousness. I think that's what this is, right? It's when we get more aware and conscious of it, and we everything becomes about awareness, right? And so we start with awareness. So if we come with awareness and look to how might I expand my awareness so that I can be more inclusive, so I can be more accepting, so that I can serve others and be have a purpose that's beyond myself, then we get back to the cornerstones to go back to front. What is the front? The front is humility, vulnerability, stepping into courage, and relationships, right? It all comes back to relationships.
Well, if I was going to say, let's have a generative conversation that gives energy to each other and hopefully those that are watching. I'm feeling filled up. I'm hoping you're feeling energized. I hope you that have joined us or watch this in the future feel energized. Like, I want to just emphasize as we look to wrap up now, Brian, like, this is not soft. It doesn't have to be particularly hard, but the sort of the intentionality is the bridge for me. Like, like I say, you being prepared to go, oh, humility, I'm going to get curious about that, rather than go, oh, humility, that feels scary, and run the other direction. So it's almost, I just love this humility. It feels a really safe place to go because it's already within us, that humility. It's just a case of we prepared to go there. It's really, really interesting.
It's the access and activation, right? So we have access to all the things. How do we activate them? Have we shut it down? How do we get the activation restarted if we need to? And the other thing that came up as you were just sharing there too, Gary, is when we go through humility, and mental health, and our challenges we may be going through as human beings, we're not alone. I think that's the message to send too, is we have communities we're involved in together. There's communities all around. There's people that are going through similar challenges. And so reach out for that. I know, if people are wondering, because we brought mental health, one thing I will share is how I got help is I decided to go to my primary care physician and say something. I say, instead of being, oh, I can deal with this, I said, hey, I'm a little bit off in terms of how I normally am. I'm not sure what's going on, but I think this might be happening. Can we check this out? And so that's what got me on the right path, and I'm doing fine now, right? I'm on the path to being able to manage this effectively. And so, especially for men that may have more of a struggle with mental health and any stigmas attached to it, my invitation is, you might go get checked out if you feel like you're off, and if it's nothing, then great. If it's something, then you're getting yourself on the path to becoming better. So that's the invitation.
And I was going to ask you, give us a couple of invitations. So that's a brilliant one, Brian. And I want to just add as well, as you've been so amazing today. Some people know, but not everybody knows, is that my own version of what you're speaking to, I had a bodily sensation in January 2020. And I was like, that doesn't feel quite right. No idea what it was. There's something in my body speaking to me. I went and got it checked out. And it went from being a pimple on my right testicle to me having my right testicle removed in 8 weeks. It ballooned up to the weight and size of a hockey ball. Sorry for your breakfast, Karima, but I think it's really important to emphasize, whether you're talking about mental health, whether you're talking about physical health, your body is telling you something all of the time. Don't ignore it. Don't suppress it. I suppressed the feeling of fear and anxiety when I was younger after being bullied for far too long. And it dictated a lot of the decisions I made. It led to poor marriages. It led to poor decision making over sort of 20 years. It doesn't have to be that way if we trust out. Back to your point, we can trust ourselves. We can be humble. We can listen to our body. We might not always know what it's saying, but as you role modeled brilliantly, go and be courageous and ask someone, this is what I'm feeling. I don't quite know what's going on. Please, can you help me out? And I just so respect you, Brian, for sharing that so vulnerably for our community today. It's just a critical way of role modeling. And how are you? You said you're generally managing it okay.
Yeah, no, I'm doing good. I'm on the right path. Yeah. So managing it well. It was proactive in terms of noticing something late last year, then going through a process and realizing that initially I was in the mild range of anxiety, but I knew something was off, and so we didn't do anything at that point other than going through some options that we weren't necessarily needing at that point. And then it came a point in early this year with different things that it got a little bit more serious and noticeable that I needed to go to a different level of treatment and support. And so we did that. And so now we're on the path to being able to be back to full self and all our capacities, and not having the thing that's getting in the way, the anxiety affect how I show up every day and my ability to do what I do every day. And and so I think, especially with what we've been through, a lot of us have been through the pandemic, but then there's been other things that have been related to that as well. Many people are probably in situations where they're not quite themselves. And if they're feeling like maybe they're not, the invitation would be to consider just reaching out to your primary care physician as your first look, right? Or your family member, and just talking to somebody and making them aware. But the invitation that is what I did. And I say that because your primary care physician knows the most about your health. So I just think that's a place that you want to start.
Amazing. And a lot of love there from Amareche for you as well, Brian.
Thank you so much, Amareche.
And again, can't see LinkedIn user. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please, can you help me out? Yeah, those are 6 incredibly powerful words, Brian, that you shared. As we look to go, I'd love, look at that, 35 minutes, 40 minutes. Sorry, Brian, I grabbed you for 10 minutes more.
It's all good, man.
Tell our listeners, our viewers, a little bit more about what is the work you're doing. Of course, we've already mentioned that we're both caring leadership coaches with Heather, and you can join the caring leadership community at caringleadership.co. But what's the other work that Brian's bringing to the world that you might want to make people aware of today?
Sure. So also involved with some other friends of ours doing human-centered leadership. And another friend of ours, Cecil Pierce, got a book out of that exact name for the work she's done with Stanford. And I'm part of a community of people helping with bringing that work forward to organizations, and working on some things for the the second half of the year around action circles and smaller group gatherings of people that are looking to move forward in their leadership development and personal development. We've tested out action circles, and it's been a great way for people to come together in small groups and learn with and from one another. And I'm in the circle. I lead the circle, but I'm actually in the circle, so we get to learn from one another. And there's this amplification that happens when we can do that and create a community where everybody feels safe, that they can belong, and they can show up with vulnerability and compassion for one another.
That's amazing. I'm sort of tempted to 2 seconds. I need to do this. Come here, dog. So she's not been on before. She's made it. She's made it onto right here, right now, live. This is Winnie, the crazy cockapoo, who's been scurrying around my feet for about the last 5 minutes. So she appreciates you, Brian. I appreciate you.
Welcome, Winnie.
Crazy Winnie the cockapoo.
I'll give your dad back to you.
Honestly, mate, I really appreciate all you're doing. You know, I followed you on your journey the last couple of years, and my invitation to everybody is think about humility, look at the meaning of humble, because it is a brilliant gateway. You know, I used to say quite recently, you know, vulnerability is a gateway behavior, because I believe it is. The more that we role model it, we sort of invite others to do the same.
Yeah. And
that's interesting. I still believe that to an extent, but I'm really curious myself now, following this discussion, to sit in that humility, almost like kindling. Like, was there an element of humility within me that allowed me to access the desire to be vulnerable? That's what I'm going out to for the rest of my day. So I really appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, and that's what happened with me. I was like, that's interesting. And I think it's a yes and. I don't think it's humility versus vulnerability. I think it's a yes and.
That's amazing. Well, Amareche, thank you. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Beautiful, beautiful shares today. Thank you, Karima, and also the amazing Vivian Aqua, of course. Thank you all for joining us. Brian, thank you for everything you're doing, my friend. Appreciate you. Excited to see what happens with you next. And if anybody watching,
thank you, my friend,
interested to join us on this show right here, right now, you can tell there's no script, completely unscripted. We literally start with what's on your heart and mind right now. Karima, if you're up for it, Vivian, Amareche, anybody else that sees this is a platform. I want to elevate your voice. This is not about me. This is about us. Back to your point about we and us. And I've been very privileged to get a LinkedIn Live. I want to make sure I use it to the best effect and amplify voices. So please do let me know. Thank you, Amareche. Thank goodness. I was at that horrible moment of like, oh my God, what's he done? So thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a fantastic, fantastic rest of your day. And you will see a little crazy video with me at the end now, because I'm still practicing with technology, Brian. So feel free to jump off, mate, or watch it if you want to have a laugh. So much love, Brian.
Thanks, to you, Gary. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Take care for now.
I just want to say that of all the wonderful people I've had a chance to meet, it's just amazing how authentically Gary shows up.
Get away from the myopic focus on just the metrics. We need to be looking at vulnerability, curiosity, what it means to be human, and have the human conversations that are so often missing in the workplace.